Back now with our special coverage, Remembering Walter Cronkite. Leslie Moonves is the president and CEO of CBS, and Morley Safer of 60 Minutes has been a CBS News correspondent since 1964. Morley, let me start with you. You've said that Walter was a wonderful person to have at the helm for correspondents out in the field. How did he support all those reporters covering the world when he was the anchor?
Well, he was extremely supportive, as you say, and he was also a very tough editor. And I think the combination of that made you work even harder. You wanted to be not just right, you wanted to nail every story. And he let you know, and he let you know when you didn't nail every story as well. But he also acted, how can I say this politely, as a kind of buffer, as a friend in court, a buffer between you and the brass. Les, you're the brass. But he really did, and he used his, whatever you want to call it, power or fame or position to protect the news division, to protect, and more in particular, to protect individuals. You know, there was a time when I was taking an awful lot of heat, and the Pentagon asked CBS formally to withdraw me, to kick me out of Vietnam. And Frank Stanton stood up, Fred Friendly stood up, but most of all, Walter stood up. And Walter used that visibility to protect his people.
You covered Vietnam with Walter, and he went to the front lines to talk with the troops on a number of occasions. Did he morally grapple with his decision to come out publicly against the war in 1968?
I think he really, really did. And because from the beginning, Walter did not want to be perceived as a pundit. He thought that was a job for other people. It was not what he was comfortable doing. And I think you could almost sense that discomfort when he stepped aside, so to speak, to give an opinion and told America that the country had reached stalemate. What was interesting to me about that broadcast, quite apart from Walter stepping out of the role of the objective reporter or anchorman or managing editor to an opinion, to a man with an opinion, was that I think he sweated that out for a long time. But ultimately, what he did, what he said, was really on so many Americans' minds at that point. And not just voters, but elected officials and senior military people. So I think he was very, very careful to use that weapon, if you like, very cautiously, very carefully, and at a time when he felt comfortable enough that others felt much the same way.
Les, what do you think Walter Cronkite meant to the evolution of TV news and to the institution of CBS News in particular?
Well, it's hard to imagine broadcast journalism without Walter Cronkite. I think anybody on the air today owes a deep debt of gratitude to him, what he stood for, how he handled the chair. There was no secret that he was the most trusted man in America, and there was a reason for that. I think the legacy of CBS, it is so important because everybody remembers Walter Cronkite as being synonymous with the name CBS. And when they talk about the Tiffany network and what it represented, I think Walter Cronkite represented that more than anybody else. And to this very day, I have such a great pride that Walter Cronkite was part of this family. And he represented the best that we are as news reporters and the best that we are as a network.
Les, in many ways, he was the antithesis of sort of the blow-dried anchor who makes his or her way through the ranks of local news. If a young Walter Cronkite walked into your office today, do you think you would hire him?
I sure hope so. I think I would. I think what stood out about Walter, not that Walter wasn't handsome, but what stood out about him was his honesty, his integrity. You know, when you speak about Walter Cronkite having a difference in the Vietnam War, and when Lyndon Johnson said, "If I've lost Walter, I've lost America," I think that was what was integral about who he was, that he represented all of us. And I think that's what made him so trusted and so successful. And I would hope if a young Walter Cronkite walked in the door, I would hire him.
Do you think, given the current landscape of the modern media, someone like Walter could break through and wield the extraordinary influence he did in his day?
Well, I think clearly the world of media has changed drastically. Back then there were 3 networks and that were dominant in news, and today we have 3 24-hour cable news networks and plus the internet, which is certainly a huge factor. So arguably news is disseminated in so many different ways than it was back then. I don't think we will ever see a day where a newsman has the power that Walter Cronkite did, and we must remember that.
Morley, we've heard so much about Walter's professionalism, also about his enthusiasm, of course, for the space program and for many of the stories he covered. But what are some of your fondest memories of him as a person and a friend, purely as a human being?
Well, I'll try to do this tactfully. He was a great man to go drinking with. Let me just say that for a start. There was no better company on a pub crawl than Walter Cronkite. And he had friends everywhere. Of course, and just other barflies would immediately regard him as a friend as well. And he had this extraordinary, really extraordinary talent for people. He was curious about people. Betsy Cronkite would complain, you know, that Walter would stop, people would stop him to make conversation in the street, and she couldn't tear him away. And she said, what people don't understand about Walter, he loves people. He's curious about them, he wants to know what they did for a living, he wants to know where they were born and where they were educated. He was a remarkable guy. And one other thing about that character and people's perception of him, which was pretty accurate, I think, was he was our best defense, CBS News' best defense, against the many charges of elitism that came from various White Houses. And you had to look and listen to, if you looked and listened to Walter Cronkite, there's no way we could be perceived as being elitist. So he managed to blunt some of those accusations that were made in Nixon administration and others.
It's wonderful in a way to celebrate his legacy. I know I'm full of pride just knowing that he walked these halls and sat at this desk, and we so appreciate you all talking to us as well tonight. Les Moonves and Morley Safer, thank you both so much.